Welcome to another episode of Down the Barrel Podcast with Jimmy and Dino.
And sometimes Jared.
Down the Barrel Podcast is brought to you by the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association
and Wolf.Report. We're talking with Mr. Land Tawney. Land Tawney, you are actually running a new organization now called the American Hunters and Anglers.
Yeah, it's
what's that all about?
It's a iteration of stuff that I've been doing for 25 years, but it's exciting. It's a small little speedboat, I would say, or a canoe versus a big old raft. We can, I guess, work at the speed of politics and kind of make people uncomfortable so that others can have conversations.
That's great.
Love it.
Yeah, that's good.
So for people that don't know, obviously, Land, you used to work with the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Yeah, I was their CEO for 10 years, and it was absolutely like the joy of my life. I think my professional career, I got to work with, volunteers and members all across the great, country. I think we only didn't have chapters in Rhode Island and Hawaii has a ton of public land. So Hawaii, where you at?
Right.
But I will say that there's kindred spirits in Minnesota. I've been to the Boundary Waters now 3 times, and just the first time I met folks in Minnesota, I don't know if it's that that Norwegian background that we have a lot of folks here in Montana, and that, I just recognize kind of the lifestyle and the heart of who you are as people. And I just very soon in my career at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers got to meet folks in Minnesota and really just fell in love with the place and fell in love with the people. So it's near and dear to my heart and will be for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we take our outdoors pretty seriously in this state, and we actually do what we can to take care of them.
I think it's more part of the culture, right, than maybe some other states. And that, it reminds me of Montana. It's not it's not like whether you hunt or fish or nobody that's somebody that hunts and fishes. It's just part of the lifestyle, right? Everybody's kind of gets that it's part of who we are as people, which I think is that's not shared in every state, but in Minnesota and Montana, I think it definitely is.
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, and I would just add that I think it is so much part of the culture here in Minnesota that we actually get to see it reflected in our legislation here.
Right.
We have dedicated funding for public lands from our state, which is just awesome.
Totally.
So super proud of that and grateful for it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the Boundary Waters, a place that's near and dear to my heart. I mean, it's only an hour away from us where we are. And I've been going there since I was a little kid. I don't think I've really missed a year except for COVID when they told us we couldn't go. So yes, I mean, that one hits home with me. So, and obviously that's a big issue where we are. And, I actually kind of wanted to ask you about, because right now I know your new organization is a 401c organization,
501c4.
501c4. Now that's a little different than what we operate C3. Now, what is the difference? Does that mean you can actually get out and talk to these politicians and promote some of them, or what's the difference there?
Yep. Thanks for the question. So like Minnesota Deer Hunters, like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, all 501c3s and all super important work. But what happens with the 501c3s, since money is tax deductible, you can only do certain things with that money. And one of those things, you only lobby 20% of your overall budget. So let's say you guys have a budget of $1 million, that'd be $200,000 that you can spend, right? And so there's a cap on lobbying, which means that limits you on how much you can try to influence elected leaders.
Right.
There's no limit on that kind of influence. And so I'm not a lobbyist. Like somebody said the other day was you're a lobbyist. I'm like, not really. I'm reporting the news and trying to get people to engage in that process, through American Hunters and Anglers. And so that's more like grassroots lobbying. It's not direct lobbying, let's say out in Washington, D.C., or making direct phone calls to folks out in Washington, D.C. So that's the difference with C4s. Another huge difference is that C3s cannot engage in the political process at all. They're forbidden.
Right.
Now you can do some candidate questionnaires as a C3. You can ask the same questions to candidates and just report the news. That is kind of the very edge of where you can go. But as a C4, we can get involved in politics. And that line is that you have to spend 51% on primary purpose. And we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but primary purpose is that advocacy kind of grassroots lobbying. That, we can be about all sorts of different issues. The election side can only be 49% of what you spend your money on. And so this year, it's an off year for federal elections. And so we're not spending any money on elections, but come 2026, we'll definitely be starting to spend some money on elections.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge benefit of the C4 status. You can actually go out and endorse candidates, right?
Endorse candidates, we can give them money. We can tell people to vote for them. Like as a C3, you cannot do any of those, right? You can't give money, you can't endorse, and you can't tell people. Even you can lead them right to the line. Like this person is not great for issue X, but you cannot say vote for, because that is in violation of your C3 status. Exactly.
So I'm really glad that you went the 501c4 route with American Hunters and Anglers, and we've been following you on social media and listen to your podcast. What did you call that again? The
arena.
The arena. That's right. Yeah. I kept wanting to say the range for some reason. But
there's going to be more of those. But it's that old idea of the arena, right? Like Theodore Roosevelt. I don't know if you guys know this.
Yeah.
But, he gave that famous speech called the arena after Taft was screwing up all of his conservation policies after he was his hand-picked successor after he was president. And so he's pissed, and he came back. And, did the bull moose party and all that kind of stuff. But what I love about the arena is that he also was a boxer, and he would box people in the White House. He had a ring set up in the White House where he would box foreign dignitaries before they would have meetings. So that idea of the arena might be a little good, if we all got to go punch each other in the face a little bit and then talk about politics.
Right? I think it would help.
You just gave me one hell of an idea for our conference room.
Heck yeah. Big gloves, 15 ounces or something.
Right. Let's figure this out.
I got a board meeting coming up in June.
Report back. I'd love to hear how that goes.
Right. I'm calling you out, Guard.
That is awesome.
That's so cool.
So, Land, I know you're out in Montana.
Yep.
Tons of public land out west, obviously. In where we are in northern Minnesota, we have a ton of public land too. Totally. Southern Minnesota, a lot less. But so, obviously, public land is important to everybody.
Yeah.
And obviously, it hits home with us and probably people out west a little bit more. Do you have connections with people, let's say, in the east side of the country? Obviously there's public land there too. Yep. Does it seem to be, from what you see, as important to those people as it is to people out in Midwest and in West?
I think at some levels it's almost even more important. And I say that because it's more finite. And when I say finite, North Carolina has, there's one forest that's 1.1 million acres. Maine has a ton of public land. Florida has a ton of land. When you think about just beaches in general, when you think about that whole eastern shore and then stuff through the Gulf, water access to the ocean is absolutely important. And what a huge vital resource that is, that, you guys may have a bunch of lakes, but it's not ocean, right? It's not this vast of wilderness of the ocean. And so I think public lands, if you're in a state, let's say Iowa, that has 98%, I think, is private and 2% is public. Yeah. That public becomes so much more important, right? And I think that,
absolutely,
whether that's wildlife management areas, national wildlife refuges, whatever that is on the ground. And then there's these, access programs that you have through the Farm Bill, but are public access to private land programs that are also, really based probably in the Midwest and in the West, but also, have programs in the East. And so I think, while you may enjoy a lot in northern Minnesota, I look out my window right now and I got public land surrounding me outside my house within 5 miles of me. That is part of our lifestyle, and we also take it for granted sometimes, where I think the people that have less public land, they're no, this is super important to us because this is one of the only places we can go that we don't have to pay a lease, so we don't have to stand in line, that we can go there and recreate just like everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about the whole beach thing, but that is a valid point.
It's huge.
It's huge. That is huge. And never crossed my mind, but that's
and it's it's the same interest, I would say, right? If you buy, a multi-million-dollar, mansion, it's on the beach, and then you see us riffraff out there that next morning because we can legally go, in that kind of high tide area. There's different rules for different states, but mostly that high tide. Like, you just paid millions of dollars. You're like, why do I got to see these guys out there? Well, it's because it's public water. That's why. And I think that they're trying to take that away. I understand it, but they're trying to take that away from the general people. And I think once you do that, then we get disconnected, from that resource and we care less about it. And so I think public access is an issue all over this country. But when you look at the East in particular, where, there's more people and probably more stressors on our public access, that public land, public access just becomes that much more important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I came from southern Kansas to where a lot of ranches and private land. I mean, all the land was bought up around us. There was a few walk-in access points, in the area, but they weren't very big. So moving to Minnesota and not knowing where to go, I was so thankful for the public lands because obviously I wasn't fortunate enough when I moved up here to get private land. So I utilize public lands for all my hunting now, when I was in southern Kansas, it was all private, and landowners and stuff. But here it's very vital to what I do and recreate and everything else. So
absolutely.
I like to say that we all live like royalty, right? Like that kingdom that you're talking about, like you come from Kansas, like surrounded by private land, maybe you get a handshake, you do some work for somebody, you get a little piece of, hunting property that you can go on. You come to Minnesota and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, look at all this that I have. And this is mine, right? And it belongs to you. It belongs to both the guys sitting next to you. It belongs to me. It belongs to anybody listening to this, which is pretty awesome, right? That we all own 640 million acres of public land in this country. Like that separates us from every other country in the world. And we should really take stock in that and like what that provides for opportunities. But I think also the outdoor economy, clean air, clean water, like et cetera, like public lands are a pretty amazing thing for all of us.
Yeah, they're treasure for sure.
Yep,
they really are. And back to backcountry hunters and anglers for a second. I think one of the best campaigns I have ever seen a conservation organization launch is that public landowner campaign. Yeah. I mean, I see those shirts everywhere. I don't own one.
I have one.
Yeah, you have one. I need like 12 of those. And, I think we might get into some copyright lawsuit in the near future when MDHA starts branding our own, but no, we won't do that. But, I talk to people all the time that talk about how they want to save up and be able to afford land someday. Yeah. And it's like, you own so much land right in your backyard, like that is your land to use as you see fit. Right.
Totally.
I mean, with obviously some restrictions.
Right.
Tragedy of the commons is a very real thing.
Yeah.
That's why we have these state agencies and federal agencies that often get a bad rap as well. Right. But, they're there to make sure that these resources are available to as many people as possible without, while breaking down those barriers to access, and that they're there for generations to come, right? Indefinitely.
Totally. Yep. I think there's something to be said of like these traditional cabins that are on a lake in Minnesota, or my mom has one here in Montana, and they're like these amazing places that what they're going to be when you get there. But I would also say, it's come up a couple of times already, is that, yes, you can go buy your little slice of heaven, which is awesome, but then that's like your slice. That's where you're going to spend the majority of your time. You're going to get to know that place amazingly. But with public lands, man, you could explore for the rest of your life and not even scratch the surface, right? And whether that's in Minnesota or in Montana, let's just take those two states. You could explore your entire lives and just barely scratch that surface. And so to me, that's like this place to have adventure. And again, it belongs to all of us. And I will tell you that public landowner kind of t-shirt, it came out of when the Bundys took over Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. So they took over that, they were armed, even though nobody was there. They took over for like 80 days. They kept on talking about, there's a national wildlife refuge that you and I have all paid for through duck stamp dollars, by the way. But they wanted to give that back to the people. And we were like, wait a minute, that belongs to the people. So that's kind of where that public landowner kind of piece, like we all own this public land. And that's where that shirt really came out of, was out of that kind of pressure, I would say, that they were putting on public lands, in particular in Oregon, but had implications for all public lands.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, do we jump right into the hot topic right now?
Let's do it. Why in the hell are politicians trying to sell this property off?
I mean, Hal Herring, I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's written a couple books. Like he's worked for Field and Stream. He was part of a movie. He does the podcast for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. But he said, and I totally agree that, right now, America is sitting on some of the most untapped wealth in the entire world, and that is our public lands. Mm-hmm. And people want to privatize those public lands. They've been wanting to do it, since the early 1900s. They want to do it since, and it kind of comes up in cycles. Like almost every 10 years, it bubbles up. Right now, in my 25-year career, it's higher than I've ever seen it in those 25 years. And I talked to folks that have been, that are retiring now and have been, in another 25 years, so 50 years. They're like, it's the worst that it's ever been right now. And you ask the question, why? It's all about money, man. It's all about money. It's all about people either wanting to rape and pillage these public lands for short-term profit, or they want to have it for themselves. And that little idea, that idea we were talking about, those little pieces of slice of heaven, there's not many places you can go right now and really buy new land that's been untouched. And so there's this idea, I think, of like really trying to take that for yourself and or exploit those resources to make a short-term buck. And that is, to me, short-sighted in many different ways. The short-term buck, man, that's just screwing the people. And it's, I think what happened, I'll get on my soapbox for a second, but, when Theodore Roosevelt really started this kind of public lands legacy that we all enjoy today, it was because timber harvest was happening in Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming at an unsustainable fashion. And he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We need to protect these places, not say no logging ever again, but say that we have to do this in a responsible fashion and do it for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time. Because at that point, the timber barons at that point were like, we're going to rape and pillage. We're going to make all this money. And who cares about what that means to the resource? Who cares what that means to the people? And so this idea of public lands, I think, is really, again, a very universal and couldn't be more American than it's for all of us, right? And so, yes, we need to take oil and gas. Yes, we need to continue to take timber. Yes, we need to still take minerals off of our public lands. But how do we do that so that we don't mess up special places? And how do we do that in a sustainable fashion that can be carried into the future? Because if you rape and pillage your public lands, then there is no future, right? And I think probably two great examples of that would be like Mesopotamia, right? Where Iraq and Iran was it was like this just plethora of wildlife and just like this melting pot of ideas, but also just like the land was very fertile. Then it's now desert, right? Because what did they do to that? They raped and pillaged it. And that is not the only reason. There's probably other factors in there, but they cut down all these trees and they reduced the resources. Another one would be Easter Island down in Chile. Same thing. Like Easter Island is off the coast of Chile. It's an island. There's all these, these big, huge statues of big heads that are still there. If you remember that kind of from Easter Island, There's nobody that lives there anymore. And you want to know why? It's because they cut down all the trees. There's nothing there anymore. And so all the water that was staying on that ground is now going into the ocean versus staying there because they cut down all the trees. And so I just think about those two examples when we look at, I think conservation in general in the United States is for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time. And so let's still develop these resources, but let's do it in a sustainable fashion, not rape and pillage.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's around here. I mean, the hot topic is when, we mentioned, let's safeguard the boundary waters. I mean, when you say that around this area, it's automatically taken to the political realm.
Yep.
Oh,
It's like you hate mining jobs.
yeah.
If you want to protect the boundary waters. So how do you navigate that type of response? Like, hey, I just want to protect the boundary waters. It's very special to me. And then it's automatically, well, you hate mining and you want people to have jobs.
So I think it's a great question. You guys are going to know this more than I. Again, I've been in the boundary waters 3 times. Hopefully going to come back again this fall.
Awesome.
Just love it up there. But I think, like, to me, there's these special places. And the boundary waters is one of those. And you all know it, but some people don't. And it's 1.1 million acres, I think. And it's the most visited wilderness in the United States, has been since 1964. And that's partly because it's accessible as F, right? Like I went up there with my young kids and we were able to get in canoes, and then the portages were a little bit tough with the kids, but like we got that done. A 90-year-old grandmother can do that same thing because you're getting in on water and you can go experience these pristine places. I think that's the first thing I would say is it's just a special place, and it has been for generations, right?
Yeah.
The other piece is where this mine is being put, right? It's a quarter mile south of the boundary waters where all that water flows north. And so there's never been a copper sulfide mine that hasn't leached bad shit. And so do you want to put that at the, the headwaters, basically, in the Cowish River, bottom of the boundary waters, where all that stuff goes north up into the Hudson Bay? Like, that just makes, like, it just, you will never, ever put that genie back in the bottle, right? Like, you will never, ever do that. And so to me, that's like, not against mining in general. That's about this special place in this certain area. When I think about the coal mining that, that the state has a long kind of standing relationship with, that continues to happen. It's a different kind of mining. And yes, it has impacts on the resource, but not as what a copper sulfide mine could have. The other thing I guess I would say to that, which I get in trouble sometimes for saying, but I'm going to say it, this is a foreign-owned company. Yes, it has a subsidiary in the United States, but this is a foreign-owned company that wants to make profits, can care less about what that does to your backyard. And so while this could be some temporary jobs up there, do you want to risk this resource for making money for a Chilean mining company? And I would say, hell no, right? Like, that's those three things. And again, that last one is a little bit more of a stretch because there is a American subsidiary of this country, of this corporation. But ultimately, that money goes to this company, that's not in the United States, and that makes no sense to me.
Right, and that subsidiary is the one that will go bankrupt when they do destroy the boundary waters and just walk away.
And guess who gets stuck with paying for that, right? You and I, every other taxpayer in America. We got the number one Superfund site here in Montana. It's Berkeley Pit, and that comes from mining back in the late 1800s and the 1900s. That literally is hundreds of miles of river, and then this huge pit of just toxic waste. That company went bankrupt, and guess who's paying for it? We, the people, right? It's a super fun site. And so to me, that's just we have to pay attention to these things. And to answer your question again directly, not this mine, not in this place.
Right.
I think it's very well said.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's just one of those things around here where it's, you can't get away from it. I mean, if you mention the boundary waters, you're automatically hate jobs and people, and and it's not about that at all.
No,
it's not about that at all. So, and I'm assuming it's like that everywhere, honestly, because everything these days is political. You can't get away from it. I mean, so obviously you deal with politicians. I mean, you said, I think it was a week or two ago, you were out in DC, right?
Yeah.
So you probably met with them, and what do you see? I mean, is it a one-sided thing? Where is this coming from? I mean,
I think in general that I still have, like, my glass is still half full about conservation and just like public lands in general. I think it's a place that we can all come together and coalesce and get past this partisan BS, right? I think it's a place that when you get past the original, the initial conversations, I think it's a place that we all find solace. I think it's a place that we all go adventure. I think it's a place that, they don't care if we're Republican or Democrat. They don't care how much money, that you made last year. These public lands are open to all of us. And I think that you can get to that conversation now. Sure, there's people that are trying to sell public lands right now. There's people that want to defile these public lands. But I think in general, when you start talking about, COVID, you brought up COVID earlier, and it sucked when we couldn't go places.
Right.
Because that's where we do find our solace, right? And I think at that point, and I think as things started to open up, even like for me, when I was taking, walks around my neighborhood and feeling that like wind on my back of my neck or the sun on my face, whatever it was, like it made me feel better. And I think if we start there, that's a place to have a conversation that I think that nobody in America could probably fault what public lands provide in that arena, right? And so I think we start there. But yeah, I think that there is people, I'll call them out. You guys don't have to say this, but Congressman Stauber, who's really for this mine in the boundary waters, he's received money from mining companies, from the mine that wants to go up there. And so he has an interest in promoting that mine. And he may talk about jobs and stuff, but it's also like, how he's been elected and how he's made, or at least he's had money for his campaigns. And so I think that since there's money involved, there's always going to be this pressure on public lands. And again, a small amount of people are going to make that money. And I think it's just up to us to kind of educate them. We haven't talked about, the sustainable jobs out of Ely yet, right? Like in that whole kind of economy that's up there. It might not be taking shit out of the ground, but oh my God, is it renewable, right? Like, you can do that every single year if you take care of that place. And it's thriving up there, again, I've been there in the winter when it should be like nobody should be up there because it's freezing ass cold. But there's still places that are open because they're facilitating, dog sledding into like the boundary waters. They're facilitating, ice fishing that's happening up there. And so there's still an industry, but the summer it's absolutely crazy up there, and that's sustainable. And so I think, to me, again, like those conversations are tough, but if you start with that, like, where do you find your solace, man? Where do you get right? And I guarantee you it's not sitting in front of a computer. I guarantee you it's not sitting in DC, like in a meeting. It's getting out somewhere. And it's really, so identifying with people there, and then I think you can have the conversation. But this money thing is never going to go away. And unfortunately, we're going to have, my kids, which they hate me probably saying this, but I'm like, man, I'm just trying to hand it off to you so you can have the same conversations that we're having today. Because this has just been a cycle that's been, and we're in it pretty bad right now, but this is just a cycle that's been played out, for generations.
Yeah. So so what you're saying is, when you go out and you're having those conversations, you can find a middle ground then. If from what you're seeing, you can actually get to that middle ground without causing an argument about politics. I
think you got to start there, and then like you got to speak your mind after that, right? Like as soon as you got a little hook, I've been doing this stuff for 25 years now, and part of the reason we started a C4 or re-engaged the C4 is because I want to punch people in the mouth for saying the wrong shit, man. Like I'm tired of oh well, like now we found this place, right? That we're talking about. We found this connection, which I think is super important. But that doesn't give you like free reign then to say other stuff out of the other side of your mouth that says, no, we want to either sell public lands or we want to defile them. Like that to me, those two things are totally different. And so when they do say those things, I think that they need, not punch is the wrong way to say it. Maybe we'll talk about dogs, right? Like they need to be shocked to help them with their behavior. And so they know what is bad and so they can do better. And I think they need to be shocked because I think too many times the sportsman's community in particular, and I've been a part of that, is that we are so concerned about a relationship that we don't want to hold people accountable for what they say or what they do. Mm-hmm. And I get that. Yeah. I really do. And I think with the C4, it's a different role and a different responsibility. Our role is to be like, no, we don't really care about that relationship. We're going to tell you what we think and what we think is good for American hunters and anglers, what we think is good for the habitat, what we think is good for the wildlife. And we're going to let the people know about that and then let that sort itself out. And so at the same time, Minnesota deer hunters can come in, backcountry hunters and anglers, Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, and have a different kind of conversation because they're not operating on this, we're just kind of trying to be nice kind of piece. And so I don't want to give them the pass is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah. And that is great. I appreciate that. Yeah. That you're doing that you're,
I absolutely appreciate it. It's one of the hardest parts of my job is having to give them the pass at times, totally. Trying to find that balance and, you got to maintain those relationships and you can't say what you just said is a load of shit and I'm not going to stand for it. I wish I could.
Well, absolutely.
Well, and the problem is the politicians they agree with you on this issue this time.
Right.
A few years later, election season, then they're not going to agree with you on this issue. Where, that's the sad part.
Well, even they'll agree to you one day and then they'll just go do something else the other. And I think it's great that you can call them out on that.
Right.
And I'm sure that must feel freeing to you after working so long in a C3. It's that you can actually do these things.
It's free and it's a little scary too, right? Like, because I think I could care less about American hunters and anglers. I'll be totally honest. Like how successful we are. I care about conservation being successful. And so this idea of how do you play the different roles and responsibilities of a C4 versus a C3, right? And how can we work together? And so again, others, like I like to say, we can break eggs so others can make omelets, right? And so like we kind of create some fire, some ire from the public on the outside. And so other organizations can kind of go in and negotiate. And the more that, that we grow and have the ability to kind of create some of that noise outside, I think the more coordinated these conversations are going to be happening within the sportsman's community. Right now, we're kind of out swinging. And I will say that I've had conversations with pretty much every organization that's out there. I think they get the role, and now they're starting to bring stuff to us. Like, we can't say this in this way, but we know you can, and so please go do this, so we can come in on the backside and negotiate from a different place. And to that point about you can't say some things sometimes, it's because you have a priority over here and they're being idiots on this one thing. And if you say they're idiots on this one thing, they may, not want to talk to you about this other piece over here. I get that. I've played that game for a long time. It's a very important role to play. But I also think that there needs to be something on the outside, and that's really what American Hunters and Anglers is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like it, and we were looking at your website, and what really stood out to me was what American Hunters and Anglers opposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in there about, loss of public land and anything that's anti-conservation, right? And then your final point was the Second Amendment issue, and you oppose anything that pretty much infringes on hunters, anglers' access to firearms.
Absolutely.
Right? Legal use of firearms.
Absolutely.
And I would say that very well aligns with MDHA's stance as well.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into the scenarios you're talking about, where, you get a politician on one side of the aisle that is willing to step up and say, you know what, we are going to support you on this issue. We are going to come out with this bill that will allow sustainable management of the gray wolf in the state of Minnesota, for example. But, then they say, if I'm going to scratch your back, when it comes up in the session, I would love your support in this gun legislation that I'm going to be introducing.
Right.
And it's a tough scenario, a tough situation to balance. And I would imagine you have to deal with that a hell of a lot more at the national level. So I'm wondering, from your experience, what advice do you have? How do you deal with that? Right.
I think that's really a good, astute question. We started in January. And so, we started with a new administration that is very supportive of the Second Amendment, and a new Congress that is very supportive of the Second Amendment. I haven't seen any attacks on the Second Amendment, I would say, like in this Congress. And if they are, they're just like balloons that are being floated. They're never going to go anywhere. And so it's not real. I think as we mature and get older and go through different administrations, that'll become a different conversation. But I think in general, the way even navigating that at BHA is that, I think how it starts to take away from opportunities for hunters in particular. That's where I think like the hunting community can get involved. I think it's a really slippery slope too, right? Because all of a sudden you're doing nothing but like Second Amendment issues, because they're going to be a lot, right? And so and do they all have correlations to hunting and fishing? So I think that's case by case basis. I think that when there was when Obama was a president, there was opportunities to get more guns on Amtrak, right? You couldn't even take your guns on Amtrak. So that was it limited a lot of people from around the country, especially coming to Minnesota. If they want to go hunt grouse, they couldn't bring their deer. They couldn't bring their rifle or their shotgun with them on Amtrak. And so that was legislation that was passed that was proactive. That I think was good. There was also legislation passed that you could carry guns through national parks. You couldn't fire them in national parks. That would be something totally different, but you could take them through. And here in Montana, when you're going through Yellowstone National Park, in particular, let's say you want to go hunt down in Wyoming, you want to go through the park. Before, it was illegal for you to carry a firearm, through the. Sorry, my phone's going off.
That's all right.
You couldn't bring that through national parks. And so those are two things that proactively happened to the Obama administration that I think, one that I'm thinking about now that we could support that's proactive, that could happen in this I think legislative cycle, is that suppressors are becoming much more of a thing in hunting and just in general in the public. They're one of the fastest growing. Yep. I think technologies in the hunting world, but they are not subject to Pittman Robertson dollars. And so for those listening, Pittman Robertson dollars, if you don't know, are excise taxes on guns and ammunition. It's been around since the 1920s, I think. And that money goes back to our state agencies to manage our wildlife. And it's at the tune of $1 billion with a B dollars every single year that goes to state agencies from guns and ammunition that's bought and sold at whatever in this country. Suppressors are not part of that yet. And so I know there's been legislation that's proposed in the past, I think last Congress, but I think it's got more legs this Congress. That's something that we could be that is awesome, right? That money, this is the new technology, maybe not new, but it's becoming more prevalent. let's like give back to that resource by putting like an excise tax, just like it is on all other guns and ammunition. And I think people would be supportive of that. I would think across the industry, there may be some people that would be opposed to that just because it's a tax, quote unquote. But when we, the people, are asking for it, and I think manufacturers in particular, because they want to give back too. I mean, I think this is I think it's not only good PR for them, but I also think that's something they feel in their hearts, right? And so I think that's one that we could support that could happen in this Congress.
Yeah, well, you take that that $200 tax stamp you have to pay for to get your suppressor, and if I knew that was going towards conservation, I'd be all for it. You know,
I mean, and it's and I think when I first heard about suppressors, I was like, oh, it's gonna be more poaching. Like, what the hell is that all about? The more I hear about it, like I'm going pretty bad in my left ear, right? I shoot right-handed, and so it's like that's where my hearing is losing. So that's a good thing. I think for kids, it's less recoil, and then also, as hunters become less of the population, when deer season's going on, they don't need to, the general public doesn't need to hear shots. Minnesota, Montana is different, but other places of this country, I think suppressors make, even more sense. So I've come around.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think first and foremost, they are a safety device, right? And I am completely deaf in my left ear, not from years and years of shooting, but because of a tumor that I had to have removed. But either way, I'm deaf in my left ear, and I only have one ear left, right? And suppressors help to preserve that. Totally.
And I mean, again, like the recoil, for I've shot a few, and that recoil is so much different. And for a kid in particular that's just starting to shoot, I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we agree 100%.
We went down a rabbit hole there. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all right.
That's what we
do here.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
This could very easily be called Down the Rabbit Hole with Jimmy and Dino.
Into the whitetail swamp.
Pretty much.
Oh, man.
So what are you seeing back to public lands issue here. What are you seeing is the most dire situation right now in your mind when it comes to public lands?
It's a good question.
Across the country.
I would say, it's the sale of, right? Like once we sell public lands, it's gone forever. Like you don't get that stuff back. And in my 25-year career, again, I haven't seen it as bad as it is right now. And let me kind of like tell you why. Like I am hearing people say stuff out loud that only was said behind closed doors before this. I'm seeing things that Mike Lee, Congressman Bishop out of Utah used to say, because this is where this really comes from, is Utah's where this kind of bad ideas come from. It's based. They've always said this stuff, but now you have Bruce Westerman, who's the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, who's out of Arkansas talking about this. You have, Secretary Burgum, who's in charge of the Interior, Interior Department, which has National Wildlife Refuges, Bureau of Land Management, Corps of Engineers, like has the lion's share of our public lands. Like he's talking about how they're a balance sheet. Maybe we should be selling some of them. And these are things that have never really been said out loud. So I think that's bad. Go back to start in January, the House makes their rules on how they're going to govern for the entire next session, and slipped into there was a rule that said you don't have to consider the value of public lands when you're going to sell or transfer them. So again, that's the value to the American people. We can talk about what that is, land value. We can talk about what that means recreational wise, and we can also talk about what that means for clean air and clean water, which I think you can't put a number on. But they said basically that if we want to sell or transfer these lands, we do not have to put a value number on them to the American people. That's bad juju. Then just like a week and a half ago at midnight, Congressman Malloy and Congressman Amadei, so Congressman Malloy is from Utah, Amadei is from Nevada, slipped in a 33-page amendment to this larger spending bill and reconciliation. And again, it's getting too wonky. But that 33 pages, part of that was selling over 500,000 acres of public land. That is real. And there's this isn't stuff that they're talking about it. This is starting to become real. And if that's a balloon that they floated, and if they're going to try that in Utah and Nevada and it actually gets done, don't tell me they're not coming for more. And so that to me, the sale of public lands is the number one threat against public lands right now. And I think it's an easy one to rally the troops around, but I also think that the hunting community is apathetic in general, and we like to be out in the woods by ourselves and tromping around and enjoying the things that we care about. But I think we forget that none of it happened by accident, and none of it's going to get carried forward by accident either. And so the sale of public lands right now has gained momentum partly because of the apathy of the people. And again, they go in cycles. The last one kind of was Congressman Chaffetz out of Utah, which happened back in 2016, so 9 years ago, where he wanted to sell 3 million acres of public land. And that's when the people went absolutely batshit crazy and pushed back. And a week later, he came out dressed in all camo and was holding his dog that doesn't hunt. Like, who holds their hunting dog when they take pictures of him? I think it was a borrowed dog, borrowed clothes, or brand new clothes. He's like, I heard you. I'm not going to sell these 3 million acres, right? That happened 9 years ago, and I think people have forgotten about how close we were. And now we are here. And that was one congressman versus multiple people now talking about this, and multiple people at high levels of government, both in the administration and both elected officials, that's a problem for us. And so I think the people, which is all we got, we don't got the money of people that either are billionaires that want to buy this for themselves. We don't got the money of the exploitive industries that are going to want to exploit these resources for themselves, but we have the people. And right now, to me, that is the most critical thing, is just to unite the people and kind of push back against this idea and, try to keep public lands in public hands.
Yeah, well, I like what you said. You said it was like every 10 years kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess that puts us in a situation, for the better or worse, that we're the ones then that have to step up. That we landed in that 10-year cycle.
Absolutely.
And I guess we got to be the ones to push back on the sale and giveaway, basically, of public lands.
This is our time.
You said,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And right now it's happening in Utah. But like you said, it's all they need is one foot in the door, and then it's going to happen all over the place.
Right. Well, I mean, it's happened in Minnesota too.
Yeah, it is.
Well, yeah, and that's where I kind of wanted to take this next is locally we're dealing with a similar situation. It's not necessarily the sale of public lands, but it would ultimately result in the loss of public lands. And that would be in turning some public lands back over to tribal entities here in the state, which is an issue that MDHA has strongly opposed. Minnesota chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has also opposed. And I think they said it very well. They oppose the loss of public lands regardless of the recipient of that land. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if you have a take on those kind of tribal land transfers.
Yeah. I think that
present here.
Obviously it's a very sticky issue.
Right.
And there's a lot of history there. But I think some of the things that we should be thinking about is like joint stewardship, right? I think the idea of how do we manage these lands together with tribal nations and kind of like traditional kind of management schemes. How do we work together to make that work for everybody versus like what you're talking about as a transfer, straight up transfer? Because I think that does make me nervous, right? About like what that means to opportunity, what that means to overall management of those places. But I think this idea of like shared stewardship is something that I've kind of like started to gravitate towards, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from like traditional ecological knowledge, which comes from, tens of thousands of years of being on the landscape. But I also think blending that with modern scientific kind of management, as well as just kind of maintaining the activities that we have now, I think is a path forward. And so I'm not necessarily dodging that question. I think that thinking about joint stewardship is a much better conversation than straight up transfer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And that's about working together, right? And I think that like that, when I think about public lands, and again, there's a lot of history there, and I wasn't a part of that, but we are here where we are now. And it's like, how do you incorporate everybody on public lands? And again, a place that doesn't care, what your background is, doesn't care how much money you made, that it's all kind of there for all of us. How we make that truly available to all of us, that is a resource that can benefit from different ideas. And I think that's partly what that shared kind of stewardship is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was going to ask you about your organization.
Yeah.
I know we watched the first episode of your podcast, The Arena, and you had a couple people on there with you.
Yeah.
Is that the entirety of your organization right now? I think it was it Barrett and
Bryn, and Aaron.
Bryn. Yeah.
Yep. So there's four of us. We're nimble. We're small. I like to say, like we like to fail fast and fail cheap because we can. We can try all sorts of new stuff all the time. Like we can make decisions. Like we're literally making decisions in hours that used to take days, I would say, and days for a good reason, right? But we just don't have to go through a lot of iterations.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we're a small group. We actually got asked the other day. It was like, so what are you going to do when you actually catch the tiger, and how are you going to scale up? And I'm like, man, I kind of want us to stay ninja-like, like that we're kind of like the black ops a little bit, that we're small and nimble. And yes, we may grow as far as like how we can impact things or followers that are on social media that we can kind of ignite. But I really want us to stay small, because I think it's just like at some level, growing is really important because you can do more things. But I think the larger you get, sometimes the more hampers, like it slows you down, and you got to think about more things. And so, to me, staying nimble, I think is so. Yes, like to answer your question, that's the crew, and they're really fun to work with. Everybody is.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. So,
I think one thing I would say is that none of us want to be perfect, and so we all know we want to get to the top of that mountain over there. We don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we're going to get to the top of that damn mountain, and we're going to maybe figure it out as we go, versus like sitting down and being like, oh, this has to be the perfect route, that has to be the perfect time of day, and, all these things. Like, no, we're just going to get to the top of that mountain. And I think all of us have thick skin to where we take feedback and we move really quickly. And so if somebody has, oh, that's a bad idea, or maybe we should tweak it, nobody gets, like anxious about that. We're like, great. Or I'm not going to listen to that. We're going to still do it this way. And so working with a team like that, and I've had, I've enjoyed, my time at BHA was a lot like that. Very entrepreneurial kind of spirit where, again, you try stuff, and if it works, you do more of that. And if it doesn't, you either tweak it or you throw it away. And I think that's kind of like where we're at right now, that we can act quickly and we can experiment. And if it doesn't work, then don't do that again. Or, change it a little bit. Or if it does work, let's go do that more, and I think that's fun. Yep.
Adapt and overcome. Yeah.
No, I like that. And there's definitely validity behind that statement,
100%.
I mean, like you said, for good reason, we have these structures in place in our organizations, right? But you're right. Sometimes to make a decision, it has to go from this subcommittee to this committee to this board to be, talked about at this next annual board meeting. Right. And before you know it, 18 months has passed and you've finally come to a decision. Well, now it's a moot point, like the opportunity has passed. Right.
Yep.
So yeah, I think keeping it small and agile can be a strength in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right?
You can be more proactive instead of reactive.
Totally. And it's like, and I think it's just different tools in the toolbox too, right? I mean, again, like these legacy organizations like you all's, so important, and without you got to think about where would Minnesota be, right? Like they would not be the same place without Minnesota deer hunters. Like that's just like a fact,
right?
So how do you like work with like these traditional kind of like organizations, as well as have this new tool in the toolbox, can hopefully make your guys' life a little bit easier, and maybe address these things when they're happening, and so that in 18 months that it is a mute point because it's not happening anymore. That is the goal. In a lot of ways, is that again, be that kind of SWAT team that goes out and first strike, and then it's done. Versus
I
holy
like
shit,
that.
This thing
like
built
a special forces unit you could send in.
That's right. And then like you said, they try it out. If it doesn't work, don't do it again. But if it does work, replicate it, mass produce it, and launch it across the board. Right.
Exactly.
And I think we've got some things in the works that kind of align exactly with that. So we're excited to see where they go as well.
Yeah. Right. For sure.
Yeah, and I brought that up mainly because I wanted to just fanboy a little bit at Barrett. I mean, that guy, I love listening to him talk. He just tells it how it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
the footage of him,
he's
the whole
great.
Bundy thing.
Oh man, I love it.
Yeah, so you definitely did watch that. I mean, that was ballsy, dude. That was like,
I
feel like
I would have shit my pants if I was in his shoes.
Kind of like professional life. But that was like, holy shit. That was a holy shit moment. And he stood up for
right. Yeah. Talk about catching the tiger. I mean, he literally threw himself into a lion's den and he stood his ground. And I mean, kudos to him.
Right.
Yeah. I applaud your whole team. It's amazing what you guys have done in the short time. And I congrats. I think it's cool.
Yeah. And it's desperately needed. So, I mean, absolutely.
I think besides having thick skin, I think we all bring different things to the table too. Like Bryn, who we haven't talked about yet, Brynja, she was like, she's so good at social media, and she has a background in marketing. She has a background as a news anchor. She like helped do some marketing for Nike when they did the last World Cup, the Women's World Cup. Like she was working with individual kind of players, and her like what she brings to this table is like social media. Like I kind of get it a little bit, right? Like I'm on the outside of kind of this generation or whatever that really knows social media, but she is in it every single day, and she understands the algorithms. But she also understands there's three things. And I try to tell everybody this because that's what I've learned from her is that when you're doing social media posts in particular, you need a hook. You got to get somebody to stop scrolling, right? Like they're going through, you got to get them to stop scrolling. Then you got to have this like call to emotion. Like, why should I be paying attention? And at the very end is like a call to action. And she can do that in 60 seconds where like that would take me 10 minutes, right? Like, you know, like, oh, I want to talk about this part. I want to talk about this part. And she's like, that's great. Boom. And like, I think that's like her news anchor background in particular, that she can cut to the chase on what's important and what the people need to hear and cut through the noise a little bit. So she is, both Aaron and Barrett are freaking amazing, but I think Bryn is just an awesome asset, and we're lucky to have her.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Are you guys all based in Montana then?
We are like happen circumstance. That's just happen circumstance.
Well, it makes sense.
We are very conscious of like, oh, you guys are just care about Montana, and that's not the case. Like this is definitely a national organization, and you know, with my background at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, or before that at National Wildlife Federation, or before that at Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, I've got the great opportunity to meet people and then also see the amazing resources this country has to offer all over, right? Like, I mean, from Louisiana, where I spent a lot of time, to I mentioned North Carolina, to Pennsylvania, up to Alaska. Spent a lot of time down in the Southwest. I already told you about, I mean, Minnesota is just freaking awesome. I mean, there's just, and so don't take that all of us are in Montana, that we're focused on Montana. No, we're right. Real conscious. Like we're almost too self-conscious about that.
Yeah, wow. I don't think you brought up a Montana specific issue.
Right. Montana is awesome.
Well, yeah, for sure. 100%. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's great. So what's next? I mean, what's going on next week, the week after? I mean, just pushing back.
Yeah, you talked about this mountain that you want to climb. What is the mountain?
Right.
I mean, the ultimate mountain, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Before I get to
this, I'm very well spoken.
That's why you're the CEO. I think bigger picture, like it's really to make conservation nonpartisan, right? And to not have this like pendulum that swings this way and swings this way. It's more in this middle and kind of swings back and forth a little bit. Like we're talking about nuances versus like, oh, we want to get rid of public lands or we want to rape them all, right? Like that, those conversations, let's get away from those. I think that's the ultimate goal, is to kind of get there. And so, you know, in the short term, before I talk about weeks, but like in the short term, from like the big picture, would be this next election cycle, and really, you know, having people that have been bad on public lands feel the pain and either lose their jobs or be like have to come farther to the middle where we all are. I would say the radical middle. Right. That's like a huge goal, I think, of AHA, American Hunters and Anglers. We love that name, AHA. That's like short term, but even in the short term, like 2 weeks. So there's a budget that was proposed by the administration. They call it their skinny budget that came out last week. It was not great for conservation as far as funding for our public land agencies. Our public land agencies, where that's Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, they've woefully underfunded, understaffed. Now they're understaffed more than anything because of all the firing that's happened, right? Like that has been, I think, purposeful I'll talk about that in a second, but I think that, so all the firing, and so now we have a budget that's basically going to cut these agencies even more. And when I think about that, they're not going to be able to do their jobs. And when you can't do your jobs, we should probably sell that public land or transfer them to the states. And transfer to the states is just a short-term kind of sale. And so, like, in the short term, that was the skinny budget, they call it, that was just kind of a balloon that was floated. I think this next week is probably when we'll hear more about the full budget that the president will put forward. That's just his ideas. Then the Congress takes that budget and they decide what they want to do with it. And so the budget, I think, is the next big fight, to be honest. I think that we're going to go through reconciliation, which is, yes, that's a budget piece. And that's where the sale of these 500,000 acres or north of 500,000 acres in Utah and Nevada is, which we need to stop. So we're working hard on that right now. And also others are. But I think the next one is going to be the actual budget. Reconciliation is something different, but it's a budgetary process. But budget, we'll talk about how we go forward. And so I think that'll be a big fight. And a lot of that is philosophical, to be honest. Like, yes, there's implications on the ground, but through a budget is really, I used to like to say this as a CEO, we can talk about shit all the time, but when it's in the budget, we actually going to do it, right? Like, you know, they're like, that is, and so when it's in a budget right now that's proposed, that's philosophical, but what gets actually passed is where we see our values in this country and what we actually want to go forward. And so I think that's going to be a big opportunity for the American people to say, no, man, public lands are important to us. And we don't want you to be, you know, drastically cutting these agencies. We want you to be at least maintaining or maybe even plussing up because of, you know, of what they give the American people, and whether that's recreation, which is hunting, fishing, backpacking, canoeing, whatever that is. I think it's, what is it? That's like 1.2. I know. Yeah, it's $1.2 trillion a year in this country. Like, that's huge. The outdoor economy is gigantic. So let's maintain that.
Absolutely.
The cornerstone of that is public lands. But then we start talking about, you know, again, clean air and clean water. And I'm like, how much is that worth to you? And all that, those public lands, you know, are so important. And you guys are ripe with, you know, clean water in Minnesota. Like, what is that water worth to you? You know, it's kind of hard to put a price tag on that. So I think the budget will be the next fight. But, you know, if for some reason, I mean, I got faith in the people right now. And I think there's a lot of people, elected officials, just haven't been educated about this issue. So I think we're going to be able to stop this sale in Nevada and in Utah. Like, my heart of hearts, I think we can. But if we don't, guess what? Like, that's going to be the next thing they're going to be doing. They're going to be looking to other states. And
right.
What we're really looking at is like kind of like some of these communities around national parks or around wilderness areas that have a lot of a recreational economy. And they're saying that, you know, the people can't live there anymore, which is absolutely true because they've been priced out because of, you know, rich people that want to come there a week a year and have their house there, right? And the workers can't work there. They're going to try to talk about the sale of public lands under the guise of affordable housing, which they've already been talking about. And that fervor is going to get higher if they get this stuff done in Utah and Nevada. Yeah. And while I think the affordable housing should be taken care of, we should not be wholesaling public land to be able to do that, because what's going to happen is affordable housing is going to be like 5%, you know, for the workers and 95% for the people who are going to pay for the project. And that's not going to be, you know, the workers or all of us that are on this call right now. And so that's been talked about already, but I think that's coming too. But no, I would say that there's this initial fight with the sale in Nevada and Utah, and then I think we go into the budget after that. One thing I guess I will say that we're paying attention to, and everybody that's listening to this in Minnesota and elsewhere should be listening to, is that what's going to happen with national wildlife refuges this next fall, what's going to happen over Memorial Day weekend with stuff that's managed by the Corps of Engineers. Corps of Engineers right now is at, like, their capacity is basically at, you know, bare minimum. And so I did a little, you know, looking, but like Leech Lake, like how's that going to like be operated? Like, what are they going to do with that whole corridor with the Mississippi River, where you guys have the headwaters that starts and the Corps, you know, is in charge of that piece? Like, how's that all going to be managed, and how's access to that going to happen? Especially, I mean, for fishing Memorial Day, which is like the unofficial start of fishing season really all across America, when, like, what impacts is that going to have on the ground? And I think that, you know, I hate to say it, but people are going to have to feel some pain to get pissed off and to really start talking to their elected officials. And these impacts are going to be real, whether that's no access at all, or boat ramps are closed, or toilets are not open. Like, these are real implications that are going to happen coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
100%. Yeah. And you got to stop that before them things become permanent. I mean, we can't allow them to become permanent.
Well, that's so like with these budgets, right? Like with these budgets, all of a sudden these things they're being closed because they don't have the people, you know, or the resources to maintain them. That's already started happening with the National Wildlife Refuge System this last year. And so how do you, like, you know, once these things are closed, getting them opened again that means more money, and asking Congress for more money, which is very difficult to do, right? And so at the very least, we need to be maintaining, which, you know, again, we get to make those decisions here pretty quickly.
Right. So with these firings that you mentioned across the board, I mean, do you think that is by design to help some of the sales of these public lands?
So I'm all about efficiency, right? Like, I think that there's, like, I mean, I don't want to say this because you all three are on the phone, but at Minnesota Deer Hunters, there's probably some efficiencies that you guys could find, right? And like some places that you could get better at cutting places. Yeah, especially the one on the far
Absolutely.
right. So I think there's some efficiencies that could be found, right? But that's not the way this was done. This was not done that way. It was done with a cleaver or with like a chainsaw, right? An actual chainsaw. Right. And so when that is happening, that is part of this kind of the 3 Ds that I talk about. We've talked about funding already, which is defund. Then the second one would be dismantle. And when you don't have the people on the ground to actually do these jobs, you're dismantling the opportunity to actually do the work. And then the third is divest, which is just a fancy word for sell it the fuck off. And to me, the firings played into that playbook absolutely, right? Like that was not done in a way that was like, oh, this is the people that probably maybe aren't doing the right. I mean, maybe they're underperformers or whatever. Like this was just, that was done in a kind of blanket way. Then they've given like the fork in the road. So they're having people retire early or just retire in general because they want to go into private practice because they're, they thought the government was going to be like, I guess stable, but it's not.
Right.
And so they're, upwards, some of these agencies have lost 20% of the people at their workforce. And I think about fire season that's coming up.
Yeah.
And sure, not a lot of them were like front lines of like firefighters, but they all had their red cards, which means they can be on the front lines. But it also means they're playing behind. And I remember when I was in the Boundary Waters, it was like 4 years ago, maybe. You guys probably know this better. There was huge fires in the Boundary Waters. And like we were out and like smoke, you could smell it. I felt like I was in Montana because we have fires every single year. But like people had to visibly go out and tell people to get out of the Boundary Waters because there was a fire coming, right? Those are the people that aren't necessarily on the front lines of fighting fires, but are keeping people safe that are no longer going to be there. And so to me, that's again part of this dismantling idea. And so like when you are defunding, dismantling, the next step is divesting. And that divesting goes to, I think that privatizing our public lands is where they really ultimately want to go because people want to make some money.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's like if I were to want to fire Dean, which I so badly do.
Sorry to even bring this up.
No, you're good.
Thanks.
But yeah, like I have no justification to let Dean go right now, right? So what better way to get justification than to cut the resources he needs to do his job effectively? And now I can say, look, Dean is a waste of oxygen. Let's get rid of him.
Dean, I apologize for even bringing this up.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example.
Exactly.
I feel like that'll really resonate with our listeners.
Now I won't be able to turn my light on when I go back to the office. My internet will be cut off.
But I actually do think it's a good example, right? I mean, like you're breaking it down. What you just said, I think correlates to what is really going on. And, I hope that a lot of these, I would hate to be 20 something coming out of college with a wildlife biology degree right now, and you thought you were going to spend your career working for the federal government because you care about it. Nobody's getting rich. This idea that these are people that are like just stacking cash is ridiculous to me. And like, what are you going to do as a young kid? And I tell them to keep the faith, right? Like the idea of being on the front lines of conservation is a very noble effort. And like, we need those people on the front lines. We need them right now. It sucks. It sucks right now. But I think, again, sometimes when things suck, the people, awaken. I think we're going to get some good things out of this, hopefully. And part of that is just the people that are aware of what's going on and they want to support the resources that they care about. And so, to those young kids that are listening to this, that might be graduating, here this last week or in the next couple of weeks, like keep the faith, man. Like we really need you on the ground. And there's a pile of people that support you, and there's a very few that don't.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think I want to say, you guys got to keep doing what you're doing because we keep hearing about these late night deals that are happening. Locally and federally. Please keep calling those guys out.
Well, yeah,
or ladies, whoever's doing it,
and definitely expect to get some emails from me, saying, "Hey, Land Governor or Congressman Smith or whoever is being an asshole," and I can't tell them that. But hey, use your C4 status and call them out for me.
Yeah. Let her do it.
I would say thank you, right? Like we're not going to be able to address every single issue. I'll just be honest about that. But I think that I would say thank you. And what is starting to happen is that, we're getting leak shit from the inside from people that are like, part of a resistance, I would say. And then also from reporters. Reporters are starting to figure out that like we can go to ground pretty quick with this. And while, traditional kind of media isn't as prevalent as it once was, social media, that's where half the people are taking their news now. And at some level that's embarrassing to me because that's at 60 to 90 second, kind of things. But it's also like, man, you got to get in there and like let the people know. And, I have faith in the people. Once they figure out what's going on, they'll push back and they'll let Congressman X or whatever know that they think that that's, not okay. And will not only, I think, make a phone call or send an email, but one of the things that we're seeing super effective is just going on social media. And that's either like testimonials for yourself or going on to their pages, right? And I think that it's this kind of wild, wild west right now that they don't know necessarily how to control, that they can't, they cannot do town halls, but they can't ignore what's happening on social media.
Yep. True story. Yeah, and they don't like to do the town hall so much anymore.
No.
Which in some ways I get, right? But I also, like, if you are truly there to represent the people, which is what democracy is about and why we elect our officials, it's not for them to take their ideals there. It's for them to represent the ideals of the people that elected them. And so this idea that they're separating themselves from the people is just, I get that you got to deal with some angry people, but that's the job you signed up for, man. And you got to have, I mean, you all probably have thick skin just because you've been involved in politics, in Minnesota. You got to have it. And if you get to that level and you wanted that job, you got to be able to deal with that stuff. And so I hope they go back to listening more at these town halls. But social media is a place that they can't ignore.
Yeah.
Well said.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and more people need to start getting involved with their, conservation groups, MDHA, BHA, trying to limit pheasants. It's because it's going to take all of us combined to make stuff happen. You know,
and that's the way that's the way democracy should work, right? Like, is that the people, we should demand what we want, and when we demand what we want, they should respond. And I think like a lot of people, they talk about like when a politician changes their mind, like let's say somebody changes their mind right now on public lands, right? Or let's say Stauber would come out tomorrow and be like, oh, actually, I love the Boundary Waters. Like we should applaud him and not call him a flip-flopper or whatever. Like he got religion, and that is important, right? I think you got to support folks when they do change their minds because they listen to the people. That's their jobs, is to listen to the people. And when the people, like as you just said, Dean, if the masses unite, and we're talking like from a hunting and angling community, but there's also all the paddlers and snowmobilers and just anybody that uses public lands outdoors, like all of us together are a gigantic voice. And if we use that voice, man, I have faith in that. But we need to make our voices loud, and we need to make it often because out in Washington D.C. last week, there's a carousel of people going in and out of these offices. It's not like you're the only ones that meets with them that day and they're like, oh, got it. That's the issue. They're going to hear from like 30, 40, 50 other people that day at 15 to 20 minute increments. That's about their issue that they care about, which is awesome. I love that our democracy is open like that. But if you think that you go in there one time and tell them something that's going to make the difference, that's not it. It's early and often all the time. And collectively, I guess is what I would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were, I mean, like you said, you were just out there. I mean, I think that's great. You're taking time out and doing that for us, really. So how can people?
I think united we stand.
Absolutely. How can people help your new organization? Is there a way to help your new organization? I know you're not collecting memberships or anything like that, but
yeah, we didn't do memberships. We're not taking corporate partners partly because we just don't want to compete with other partners. But also, it's you don't have that infrastructure to take care of that stuff either. And I'll just be honest about that, right?
Yeah.
So how can people help? I think there's a couple ways. One, follow us on social media. Instagram is probably our most robust. Facebook feels like it's like kind of starting to catch on. TikTok a little bit, but Instagram is like really kind of where we're at. So follow us there. When you see a post that you agree with, share that post because that means that other people are going to see that and they're going to, that's the way that we kind of change, I guess, create social change. And then, I think that when you get the opportunity, there's a call to action. The best way, send an email, these standard emails, that's an okay way. When you talk to chiefs of staff out in DC, they're like, we get 1 million of these form letters and they really don't break through the noise. if somebody writes an email or sends us a letter that is not handwritten, but like is like in their own words, that's better in telling stories. But the best one is a phone call, right? Like, and so when there's those calls to action about making a phone call, you got to make that phone call. It's 202-224-3121. And what that does, it gets you to the switchboard, and then you say where you live. That gets you to your representative, because you only have one representative. Then you have your 2 senators. And so they'll connect you. So when those calls to actions happen, do it. And then that other one I talked about on social media is you can go to their pages. Please be respectful, right? Like, don't go in there and be like, Congressman X, you're an idiot, and like, I'm never going to vote for you again because you're an idiot. Like, be in there and be like, hey, man, like, public lands are important to me. And I just, like, as my elected official, I want you to respect that and make sure that we keep public lands in public hands. I think being respectful is probably, even though we punch people sometimes in the mouth, I think it's like, when you're talking to them personally, I think you need to be respectful.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how. The last one would be like, you can donate money. We've been taking money from folks all across the country, from $25. Our largest check has been $2,500. But that's kind of the way we keep Bryn in particular around. And she's, her genius and just skills. But I also know that there's lots of other, pinches on people. So that's the hardest one for me to ask for, I guess, is money.
Right. But totally worth it if you can.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can absolutely go on Instagram and find them. So what's the web address where people can find you?
So there's a short one and a long one. I like the short one better. It's nolandgrab.com. And so we snagged that in January, which I'm super stoked about. The larger website is americanhuntersанdanglers.com, or .org, sorry. But nolandgrab.com is an easy way to remember and get there. Yep. On social media, it's just American Hunters Anglers. There's no and in there. It's just American Hunters Anglers, both on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. But yeah, follow us. We started in January. We've got a following now of I think 4,600 people. A couple of our videos have gone over 100,000, which is super rad.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Bryn defines viral as 20 times your followers. And so we had one I call Papa Smurf. A guy out of Arizona did a testimonial for us, and he has this big white beard, and he's wearing camo overalls, camo shirt, camo hat. Looks like Papa Smurf with that big white beard. But he did a video about how much he cared about public lands and how he thought affordable housing was not a way to solve the affordable housing crisis by selling public lands. And that thing got 161,000 views. It went crazy viral for us. So we like to say we're punching above our weight a little bit, but that's because, again, I think we've got smart people, and Bryn in particular, that can help us with that.
Yeah. And I think he's just calling it like it is. And I think that's important. And that's refreshing to people, because so often we have to hold back on that.
Yeah.
We have to hold people accountable now, I think. And it's great that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, that calling it like it is, is super important. And again, roles and responsibilities. Not everybody can do that, but we can. And we're going to continue to do that every single time. We didn't talk about the website portion that, we're basing all this off the North American wildlife conservation model. And it's a model that I think everybody pretty much knows about. But those 7 sisters, and especially the democracy of the hunt, I think is so important to us. We take away that opportunity for anybody to hunt and fish, and it becomes this kind of elite thing where only a select few, and we lose hunting and fishing, I think, pretty quickly in this country. I think the democracy of the hunt is just absolutely important, and public lands are a huge piece of that. So,
yeah, the biggest piece of that, honestly, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think the other one I guess I would call out was just the wildlife belong to the people, in other countries, it belongs to the wealthy and the elite, where I think 1840s, the Supreme Court decided that wildlife belonged to the people. And that was a huge decision that, these didn't belong to the kings, or if you were a landowner and the king had given you, the what they call it, the fowl, they gave all the fish and wildlife to that person when they bought that land. Well, that's not, we said, that's not where we want to be in this country. We want that wildlife belong to the people. We want that managed by our state agencies in particular, in trust for the people. But public lands and wildlife belong to the people. If we just maintain those two, we're going to be in a really good place.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, we appreciate all the work you're doing and taking the time to talk with us today.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have anything else, or if you have any closing thoughts.
Right. I mean, what is your closing thought of everybody up here in northern Minnesota that listens to our little podcast?
Yeah.
What do you want them to know?
Worldwide.
I mean, so we've talked a lot about kind of the storm that's in front of us right now. right? And it feels pretty overwhelming. And I think that I'm a huge student of our conservation history, and without like talking about it for too long, that every single time we've faced really hard times in this country when it comes to conservation, the people have stepped up. And I'll give one example of that, but that was like the dirty 30s, Dust Bowl, lids coming off the prairie. Wildlife is in serious trouble. And you got the duck stamp, you got Pittman Robertson that we talked about today, you got Ducks Unlimited that started the National Wildlife Federation, you got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which was established back then. Out of some really bad things, we've had some good that is still paying benefits today. Like Pittman Robertson, again, like $1 billion a year. The duck stamp is less than that, but it still provides, I think, $100 million a year for national wildlife refuges every single year that duck hunters have to buy. And so out of this kind of bad can come some good. And I truly think that this, what is going on right now is uniting the people. And if we unite the people, not only can we push back against these ill-fated ideas, but we can use that for positive. And I truly, truly believe that. And it's partly I believe that because I'm a student of history. And while it's, our conservation history, modern conservation history is only about 150 years old in this country. Man, have we done a lot. And it's still an experiment. And none of that happened by accident. And it's not going to be carried forward by accident either. It's going to, I think it was said earlier, this is our time. This is our time to do our part, to carry on that legacy and at least keep it the way it is and maybe make it a little bit better. But for that next generation to come in and, they're going to have the same conversations, almost guaranteed that we're having.
Exactly.
But I really, again, I don't want anybody to come away from this being like, oh my God, we are in trouble. Yes, we are. We are in trouble. But there's something we can do about it and stop bitching and get in the middle. I think you can't bitch from the sidelines and really be that armchair quarterback and talk about how it could have been. Let's be in the middle of the arena, and we might not win them all, but man, I think we got to be in it. And there's many different roles and responsibilities that can be in this fight. But I think you have to get into it so that we get positive out of it.
Right. And we got to remind people it can be a nonpartisan issue. Correct. Come to that, like you said, that middle ground, and conservation should be sacred. It should, as an American, it should be sacred to us. And we have to push back on making this a political issue.
Absolutely.
Because that just divides people.
Yep. Absolutely. When I think, and I guess the only thing I would say in response to that is it's always going to be a political issue, but we need to make it so it's a political issue that is for everybody, right? So it's that radical middle that I'm referencing, that far left and far right, they're going to be there. But I would rather this country be governed by the radical middle because that is much more sustainable, and we don't do these things. We kind of stay in that middle path, and so that is going to be inherently political. But let's make it maybe less. What's the best way to say that? Maybe less of a swing on either side. Let's make it more in that radical middle, radical political middle. If we can keep it there, I think we're really good.
Yep,
absolutely.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Land.
Yes, thanks, Land.
We appreciate
next time I got the memo now. I'm going to put a couple of my big whitetails behind me.
There you go.
We're at home.
Yeah, I'd love to see them. So these ones we were donated, so they're not ours.
Oh, really? I get it. Yeah, so you guys are fake hunters. I didn't know.
I've got one close to that. I've got one close, but not quite.
These are props.
And I will say, thank you guys too. I think part of the way we spread information. I talk about the 60 to 90 seconds on social media, which totally sucks because it's hard to have a conversation. Thank you for the conversation today. We got to talk in detail about things that, hopefully people listen to this, learn some things today and are inspired to go learn more.
Exactly.
Yes,
Make people think that, it doesn't have to be political.
Right.
I mean, like you said, it is political, but let's give them a path to make it.
It doesn't have to be partisan.
Yeah, we can come to some middle ground.
Absolutely. And
make it more purple.
That's great.
Yeah.
There you go.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, we'll let you go. We know you're a busy guy, so we appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Anytime.
And keep up the good work.
Thanks you all again for using your voice. That's awesome. All right.
The Minnesota Deer Hunters Association has been building our hunting and conservation legacy over the past 40 plus years through habitat, education, advocacy, and legislation in Minnesota for Minnesota.